Hi, I wanted to create a short video to help you with the post-lab report on your first lab assignment in Chemistry 161. Specifically, I kind of want to show you how to do the graphing component. So now that we've finished our first lab time, you're going to need to finish the activity. And that might mean finishing up a few of the lab safety questions. And it'll probably involve looking at the post-lab questions and completing those. So the first one is going to talk about graphing. And if you're like, wait, how do I have all this information? It's written in the sheets that were printed for you, but also you can come to the lab assignment page. It has those like documents that were handed out in class. It also has a link to our lab reference and appendices when we used to print a whole manual. And it has now recently updated links to images for parts B and C if you were unable to complete the experiment. You can use these pictures to get the rest of your data. So in this, I want to point out that if you click the lab reference and appendices, it's going to take you to a document that has a ton of stuff in it. The first part's all about just like being in lab and safety. And then Appendix B is going to walk through how to use different types of instruments, like how to read a burette, which we did the other day in lab. And if that was hard and you kind of stumbled through it and you're like, I don't really know what I did. If you read through that section now, it might make more sense and reinforce what you were trying to learn in the class. Appendix B is all about graphing. And so if using Excel or Google Sheets or graphing in general feels new or it's been a while, I recommend taking a look at this resource. It's pretty basic. It doesn't have a ton, but it's going to tell you about the basics and titles and things like that. So when you complete this assignment, let's look at it right now. Here's our worksheet, our post-lab assignment. Towards the end. One of the first things you're going to do is create a graph, and you have to use a graphing program. You can use Excel, you can use Google Sheets. You should have access to these both for free through your Seattle College's account. And you're going to prepare a scatter plot, and you're going to do one with the radius changing and one with the length changing. And we want to look at mass plotted against a radius. So in doing this, you're going to make the graph, but I'm going to point out that you need to make a different graph than your partner. So you'll go through the actual exercise yourself. You also need to make sure that you have appropriate titles and labels on your graph. And I've given you an example of how to label a table. And so with a graph, you would just do graph A and then give a short explanation of it. The other piece is you need to have the right variable on the right axis. And include 0.00. The lab appendices are going to talk about this right variable on the right axis. So the vertical y-axis shows the dependent variable, and the x-axis will then be the most independent variable you have. So I'm going to walk through graphing here, and I'm going to start with Google Sheets. And I open one up, and I just got us a little bit started. So we're going to input our x and y variables. Our y variable will be the dependent and our x the independent. So when we are performing this experiment, we are intentionally changing the radius or the length of the dowel. And that then has an impact on the mass. And so we are measuring the mass, which will be then the dependent variable after we change and are intentional about the length or the radius, which would be the independent variable. So I'm going to put up here length or radius, and then mass will be our y. In our graphing programs, we always put the x-axis first and then the y-axis in our spreadsheet, because when we select and create a scatter plot chart, it'll always put the first column as the x-axis. So I'm going to just create a data set here. You are going to take your data that you measured and you're going to input it into this graphing program. So you would take the different lengths of the dowels that had the same radius and you would input them with the correct number of sig figs. I'm not going to be using the correct number of sig figs. I'm just going to do this. And then you would input the mass that corresponded with it. So this is 2. Once you have inputted the data that you measured in class, you're going to create a scatter plot chart. So I'm going to highlight the data that I want to graph. I'm going to go up to Insert, Chart, and I don't want a column. Usually, yeah, no. So I'm going to come over here to the setup and I'm going to do some customization. So the chart type I want is not a bar graph or a line. It is, bingo, a scatter plot like this with the small dots. Each dot is going to be a data point. And so now I have all of these data points that were, sorry, let's move this. Right here, we can see 0, 0, we can see 1 and 2, and so on. It's going to take these axes right here and create a standard like chart title, but this isn't going to be a good chart title. I'm going to want to instead change this to something like graph 1 or graph A, and then some sort of description about it. And you'll have to make this up. So this will be a descriptive title. Think about like a sentence or less. And that'll populate up there. I also now need to make sure that my X and Y axes are correct. So you'll come in and you'll put in if it's length or if it's radius or if it's mass. So on our X axis, we're putting our independent. And you'll actually write the variable. I'm just kind of making an example, right? And you can just come and click on the axis title. And here I would put mass, over here length or radius. And then I have my variables written out. When you do this, you are always going to have the type of variable, and you're going to put in parentheses the units. So that way someone who's reading this will be like, oh, you measured in grams and not kilograms. And that is kind of it. What we will do a lot in this class is add trend lines. And it's going to fit the data to a line. And we can do this, I think, by clicking. So what I did just now is I went to one of the data points and I right-clicked. And I have a lot of options when I do that. One of these should be... You can tell I mostly work in Excel. Aha, okay. So you just double click the whole thing. In Excel on your desktop, you click the data point. I'll show you that in a minute. But if you just scroll down on customize on series, so I'm choosing series and I'm selecting down, I'm going to pick trend line. And right now it's going to create a linear line. I can look at this data and see that it's logarithmic. So I would probably do, or exponential, sorry, exponential line. Typically you are always going to do a linear trend line for this. So I'll put that in there since that's what you're going to see the most. You're also going to want with that trend line, let's go back to series. Typically with our trend line, we also want to see the equation. So it's going to give us the equation for the line that it used. So y would equal 3.8x minus 1.6. And that is the equation of this trend line that was created. And that's graphing with with Google Sheets. So let's take a look at this if we were doing it in Excel. So I'm going to use the desktop version. There is a 360 online version that is mostly the same, but some of the things are different. The most noticeable difference between the online and the desktop version of Excel is the online version will not put multiple data sets in the same graph. This is something we definitely have to do during the year. And so you have a certain number of downloads of Excel. Whatever machine you like using, please download a desktop version of Excel. Or use the ones in the library or something like that. So I'm going to copy this data set so we can use the same one. And here I've got Excel open here. And I'm just going to, oh, that didn't do it at all. I'm going to copy paste in theory. So let's do this again. Copy. paste. There we go. It all went into the same spot, so forget that. All right, let's create our X and our Y. And this is our independent variable. Let's make these bigger. And our dependent. And I'm just going to put in the same values that we saw before. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is like a stylistic thing. I like it centered, so I'm just going to choose that option here under the home screen. But that's because I can't help myself. So I'm going to make this bold too. All right, so it's really similar to what we were doing in Google Sheets. I'm just going to select the data set that I'm interested in, and I am going to go to data, or actually I'm going to go to insert, and I'm going to choose a chart. So under this chart option here, and if it's a drop-down menu for charts, it would be the same as a ribbon version. I'm going to choose the one that looks like a scatter plot. So it's going to look like just a bunch of little dots. So I'm going to choose this, and I'm not going to choose one that links them together because we want to use a trend line instead. I'm going to just choose the one that shows the data points. Ooh, there we go. So it looks really similar, right? My chart title I would put in here, would be something like, and this one I'm just double clicking and then highlighting and changing instead of doing the work on the side panel. So like graph A, descriptive title. So now I need to add in my axis titles. And so I'm going to click on my graph and I get these 3 icons on the right hand side, a plus, a paint, and like a funnel. So this is going to be like filtering stuff. I want this chart elements plus, and I'm going to change what I get. So I want to have axis labels, and I don't want data labels that would label each of the individual points, or error bars. We didn't really measure error. And I don't really need a legend, so I wouldn't include it unless I had like multiple lines. But I do want a trend line, so I'll also click trend line. And this has a little arrow to the side. I'm going to make sure that it's linear. Okay, so now I can come in and highlight the axis title and like just highlight it all and change it. So this will be my x-axis variable. So let's say it was mass, and I was putting it in units of grams. And then my axis title for the y-axis would be something like radius or length. And then I would have probably centimeters or something like that. And then I would have this right here, my trend line itself. I can double click on and I can format trend line to include the equations. I'll hit display equation here on the side, and there we go. And now I have a chart in Excel on the desktop version. All right, good luck working on this. If it's your first time playing with Excel, play around with it. This is a really important skill to have if you are doing any career, not just a STEM career. So I encourage you to have fun with it. And if you need help, come and join me in office hours on Tuesday before class, or send me an email.